I've been a fan of Mike Judge as far back as I can remember. Beavis and Butthead, the movie Beavis and Butthead Do America, I remember seeing as a kid on video and it just blowing my mind. I watched King of the Hill while it was on when I lived in Texas. And I could tell you, as someone who lived in an area very similar to the one that's in that show, it wasn't far off. I've also been a fan of his movie work like Office Space or his recent stuff like Silicon Valley. So, needless to say, I'm a Mike Judge fan. I've always been one. I don't love everything he does as much as some other stuff, but I do consider King of the Hill to be a masterpiece. I do consider Office Space to be a classic. And I just like the way he talks. He's a very interesting guy. He's got a very interesting voice when you see him in interviews. And I like his humor. I've always very much enjoyed his humor and his wit. I think he's actually a great satirist. I think he has a big heart, and I think he's up there with Trey Parker and Matt Stone and what they've done with South Park, and he's up there with Matt Groening, Sam Simon, and James Brooks and what they did with The Simpsons. He's one of the great writers in animation, and the great thing about Mike Judge is that he's not a very good animator. He never was. He couldn't really do it, but he knew he was funny and he could write well. So he really got ahead of a lot of people that were more talented than him in the animation department because, quite frankly, he had more things to say and he had more stories to tell. Mike Judge is proof that you can work in different mediums and you don't have to have a bunch of talent necessarily. He's not a great technical filmmaker, he's not a great animator, but he's a great storyteller, and he always was. He's been one ever since he started, and if anything, he's evolved through the years and become more comfortable and confident in his storytelling abilities. I think in a lot of ways he's become a bit of a poet of the South. You know, he reminds me of Richard Linklater or Wes Anderson, you know, or the Wilson brothers, these guys that came from Texas and just kind of, you know, they're artsy guys, but they live in that area, and it's almost like the juxtaposition between those things is really interesting. That Mike Judge he feels like this really blue collar Southern guy, but he's actually in a lot of ways a intellectual, deep thinker kind of guy. He went to school for physics, I believe. He's a very smart guy. But I'm here to talk about Tales from the Tour Bus, which is his new show. And in my opinion, the best thing he's ever done. And I mean that. And I don't say that lightly. I know King of the Hill is, you know, considered a classic. People love Beavis and Butthead, especially the old Beavis and Butthead. Even his recent films have been pretty popular. They have a cult status. But for me, this is maybe the best thing on TV right now, and I don't hear nearly enough people talking about it. I haven't seen many videos on it. I haven't seen many reviews on it. I heard a little bit about it, but it's honestly one of the most overlooked gems right now. Cinemax is doing the show. It's about 30 minutes per episode. If you don't know the premise, Tales from the Tour Bus starts with Mike Judge at the beginning setting in a tour bus, and he kind of starts with the premise. Like in the first episode with Johnny Paycheck, which is, in my opinion, the best episode, and it's one of the only criticisms I have of the show is that it peaks with the first episode is just amazing. It's perfect, and I'd recommend for anyone to watch that first episode about Johnny Paycheck, who I only had a very small bit of knowledge about that I knew from like my parents or my grandparents. I didn't know that much. I knew his music, but I didn't know how interesting the man was. But he starts with the premise that he turns on the TV and he hears everyone on the news talking about NWA. And how their music is bad and toxic and going to do things and how dangerous these guys are. And he doesn't really agree with that. Then he flips on the channel and he sees a thing about Johnny Paycheck getting arrested for something. And then he goes, well, why isn't everyone on the news talking about Johnny Paycheck the way they're talking about NWA? Now that sets up an interesting idea. Then he sets up another idea where he says, you probably don't like country music. Probably think it's simplistic and stupid and there's more interesting genres than that. And he goes, you might be right, but it's good to have an open mind. And this is the genius of Mike Judge. He never condescends to his audience. He knows he has good stuff here, and he knows that he's going to get you, but he doesn't come in with that. He doesn't come in all cocky. He just sets up this premise. Then he lets the work speak for itself. Then Tales from the Tour Bus is really a documentary show. It's a show that is a series of interviews with people who knew a famous person in country music. And each episode covers a different figure, and they're all legends. I mean, you got Jerry Lee Lewis, George Jones, and Tammy Wynette, Billy Joe Schaefer, Waylon Jennings, Blaze Foley. It's only 8 episodes. I don't think it's done yet. I think I'm a couple episodes behind, but I've seen. It's already good enough. I don't need to see I'm going to watch them, but I'm giving you this recommendation without it because it's immediately satisfying. It's an instantly gratifying show. So it's a series of interviews with people that knew the person, like Johnny Paycheck. They talked to his friends and people that were associated with him and people that know about that time, historians of that era. In a lot of ways, the structure and pace of it reminds me of a documentary I love from the 90s called When We Were Kings, about Muhammad Ali's fight with George Foreman in Africa. And it gets... See, what Mike Judge does here, instead of laying everything out in front here, he subtly builds kind of a thesis about culture, about art, about music, and a class. And he makes a punk rock statement in a lot of ways. He also shows the parallels between country music and hip hop, and how Johnny Paycheck is a gangster, straight up. I mean, he's more of a gangster than most of the rappers who get credit for being gangsters. It's amazing stuff, but it's the storytelling that comes across. It's several stories within stories about this person they knew. And every story they tell is almost more fascinating and wonderful than the last. It shows that what you can get from nonfiction. There's always been that thing that you can't write as good as something that actually happens. Now, I don't necessarily believe that. I think some of the best stuff comes from fiction, obviously. Although most writers and artists bring things from a real place. They're coming from a real place. Tales from the Tour Bus, though, all this stuff's true. And it's crazy how dense it is. It comes off like a fantastic southern crime novel or something. I mean, I can't explain how good it is. I mean, it immediately blew me away. And the genius stroke of this whole show and his idea here is he animates these stories. So, first he has himself and these other people he's interviewing, and they put animation over them, kind of like how Richard Linklater did the Waking Life. But then the sequences that are just the stories being told, they're animated by themselves, and they're kind of done in that King of the Hill style, Beavis and Butthead, very cheap, crude animation. So you get a half hour of just dense narrative. I mean, you're getting all sorts of stories in a timeline being shown to you in the animated segments, and then you're getting these interviews that just reinforce those, and then Mike Judge's commentary, and he takes a back seat to a lot of this because he knows it's good. He really could have just made a live-action documentary about country music and put 3 or 4 of these stories together, and he might have got an Academy Award nomination. It's really that good. It's the stories he found here that are so interesting and stuff that you don't hear enough about. What he's trying to do at the show is explain country music to people who are critical of it, to music snobs or music hipsters that don't want to acknowledge anything about it. And what he does through the show in a poetic way is he explains how a country song gets written. The stories get told in kind of the way of a country song, because country songs ultimately are stories over and over and over again. And then at the end, especially in the Johnny Paycheck episode, you kind of understand then why a country song is so powerful and emotional and tragic, and what it really is. And that's so amazing to me that he was able to accomplish that, because I'm not a big country music guy. I mean, I like a lot of people like anyone else. I like Johnny Cash, but it's not my favorite genre. I prefer a lot of other things. But this gives you a respect for it that you probably didn't have before. And it's stuff that you should already know if you just have any basic understanding of the history of these things. But it's the way he tells it. It's so compelling as a format to tell it this way. It's almost like Unsolved Mysteries, or that movie The Thin Blue Line by Errol Morris, where the reenactments are the story. And even though the stories are true, the reenactments end up feeling more cinematic and compelling than a lot of things in the genre. The Thin Blue Line's like watching a great crime film. Or watching Unsolved Mysteries. I remember when I was a kid, and the reenactments, it was genuinely tense and scary, and the narration, the voiceover by Robert Stack would really add something to it. And like I said, Mike Judge could have done this live action. It could have just been stories being told by these people and him filming them, these interviews and stuff like that. He didn't need to add the animation for this to be great. But the fact that he did that was even more brilliant, that he brought his own thing to it. So ultimately it does feel like a Mike Judge project, even though a lot of the content of it's not his. He didn't come up with a lot of this stuff. But it fits so well with King of the Hill, or with Beavis and Butthead and stuff like that, or even going back to Office Space. He somehow still makes a point about society and the everyman and how we view things, and the anti-heroes of the world. The little man speaking up for for everyone. He seems to really believe in the middle class, the blue collar worker. He seems to have a respect for people like that. He seems to have a respect for the elegance of the country attitude, what it's really about. And every episode gives you a great insight into these people's minds. And they're very flawed people, every single one of them. I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin, you know. But they're fair. It's a nuanced view on these people. It shows you the negatives and the positives, and it leaves it up to you to feel what you want to about them. You know, Mike Judge doesn't try to tell you what to feel. He just presents the things to you and lets you come to your own conclusions. But within that, it leaves all sorts of things up to interpretation. How much of these stories are actually true, or are they being, or is it more sensational for entertainment value? And the animation adds this extra comedic element that wouldn't be there. And it all just comes together. It's so cohesive as a whole. It's just a brilliant work. It all just comes together. The pacing's killer. As soon as an episode starts, you're like, wow, that was over. And you go on this epic journey in a half hour, episode to episode. And just that format of him being in the tour bus talking to you, setting up a premise, and then going into that premise and letting you see it play out that way. And then you really get to know these people who he's talking to. You really get to know the person that the episode's about. You really get a sense of time and history quick. You get a lot of knowledge fast. It's actually, I'd say, an educational show in a lot of ways. It actually teaches you a lot very quickly too, in an entertaining way. It's not boring to learn some of the stuff that you probably didn't think you were interested in knowing. And to me, I have no problem saying it's Mike Judge's masterpiece. I think this is the best thing he's ever done, or he's ever been associated with. I love every single episode. I'm addicted to it. I can't shut up about it on Twitter. I had to make this video because, like I said, nobody's talking about it, and it's driving me nuts. This is so... I mean, Cinemax should be getting so much more credit for this show. I have it on DVR, so I can just watch it on TV, but I'm sure you can find it online, or when it comes out on DVD. I can't recommend this enough. If you're a fan of Mike Judge, if you're a fan of music, if you're a fan of history, if you like documentaries, if you like any of those things, this is right up your alley. This is one of the best things of 2017. It stands above so many movies and shows that came out this year, and it lacks pretension. It's so not aware of how great it is that makes it even greater. It's not aware of the genius of the whole thing of it, and it makes it more powerful as an experience. I think it's a very cathartic, emotional, rich show that is about storytelling and the stories we tell and how those stories change over time, and how the public opinion on certain things gets skewed or on people because of how certain stories become popular and other ones get ignored. Why isn't Johnny Paycheck as talked about as NWA? He really should be. He sold 10 million records. He had hit songs, and he was in the Hells Angels. I mean, he did a lot of crazy stuff. And that's what's so great about it. He's showing the respect for country music and what it deserves in that same regard as rock and roll or punk and all these things that people, especially in today's world, we seem to just give a pass to as just, oh, these were brilliant things. And a lot of people, young people, seem to be so critical of country music. And I'm not saying all, because country music's a gigantic genre, and today there's the criticism that it's pop country. But it is always good to go back to the roots of things and look at the history of it and understand it. And for me personally, this taught me more about how a country song is written and what it means to people who listen to country music and what they're looking for. And I saw, wow, this is what's so brilliant about it, and this is why I like Bob Dylan or something. This is why people like this stuff. And I'll admit that I was ignorant to a lot of things about this genre. I was ignorant to a lot of people within it, and I'm glad that this show taught me something and opened my eyes up. When Mike Judge says it's always good to have an open mind, he's right. And that's a lesson that everyone should learn, that never gets old. Opening up to a new perspective. And Tales from the Tour Bus gives you so many perspectives, and so many of them so unique and beautiful and interesting, and they just grab you immediately. Like I said, immediate satisfaction. That you can cling on to any one of them, and the more you invest in this show personally, the more you're going to get out of it. But to me, that's always a sign of something that's truly great. So, just to wrap it up, please watch Mike Judge Presents Tales from the Tour Bus on Cinemax. It's one of the best shows on television. I hope they continue doing it. I hope he tackles other genres and does other things, because it turns out Mike Judge is a brilliant documentary filmmaker, and yeah, he didn't lose his voice within that. And yeah, it reminds me the most of Errol Morris and what he does with his work, because I'm a big Errol Morris fan, and it's always, he makes the content of his documentary so fascinating. You know, he just, whatever the subject matter is, whatever in the frame is fascinating, but he still kind of keeps his voice within each one of his films, and you know it's an Errol Morris movie. Well, as a Mike Judge fan and as a fan of stuff like this, to see these two worlds come together, it's just, I mean, it really could have brought a tear to my eye. It's real artistry, and I'm just glad to see Mike Judge grow, and I'm glad to grow with him, and I hope that the show gets talked about more, and I hope that people start going on about it. It's really a gem. It really is. So thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.